A lion's body, a human head, and the wings of an eagle form a being that never lived, yet never died. These timeless chimeras are far more than fanciful monsters. They are the fundamental drivers of our evolutionary imagination. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these impossible creatures are the secret reason we can innovate and think in abstract terms. How did a make-believe griffin help build a real airplane? Why do we share the same hybrid nightmares as people who lived thousands of years ago? The answers reveal that your imagination is humanity's most powerful survival tool. What is the first mythical beast that comes to your mind when you think about the unknown? That original chimera was a living paradox, a creature of three parts that should never belong together. Yet this idea of the hybrid being is a universal human constant, found in every corner of the ancient world. It is the foundational language of our earliest storytelling. Think of the Mesopotamian Lamassu, a colossal guardian with the body of a bull, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a wise king. Or journey to the banks of the Nile and you will find the Sphinx, its lion body a monument to earthly power, its human face a testament to divine intellect. These are not random monster mashups, they are deliberate, symbolic constructs. Each fusion is a carefully chosen recipe. The lion offers untamed strength, the eagle grants perspective from the heavens, and the human element brings consciousness and reason. By stitching these traits into a single entity, our ancestors created a cognitive bridge. They were trying to grasp abstract, overwhelming concepts like royal authority, divine protection, or the very order of the cosmos. Giving these ideas a tangible, albeit imaginary, form made them easier to process, to discuss, and to pass down through generations. The chimera was their most powerful tool for thinking the unthinkable. And once this tool was forged, our minds began to use it for a much more personal and terrifying purpose, to explore the deepest, most unsettling parts of our own nature. This restless drive to find patterns is hardwired into our very biology. Our brains are prediction engines, constantly sifting through noise, desperate to find a signal. This fundamental trait is called pareidolia, the instinct to see a familiar face in the clouds or a figure in the gnarled bark of a tree. For our ancestors, this was not a parlor trick. It was a vital survival mechanism. A sudden movement in the tall grass was not just random. It was a pattern that the mind had to solve instantly. Was it a lion, a rival, or something entirely new? When the data was incomplete, the brain did not just leave a blank space. It filled the gap by stitching together the most logical pieces it had. The silent movement of a cat, the soaring freedom of a hawk, the strategic intelligence of a human hunter. These known qualities could fuse into a single, new entity, a hybrid form that gave a name and a shape to the unexplained. This mental synthesis is the cognitive blueprint for every chimera ever conceived. It is not a sign of a flawed or primitive mind, but the very engine of human creativity. By blending the world's raw materials, we could simulate possibilities, run thought experiments, and imagine realities beyond our own. This foundational ability to connect the dots, even when some dots were missing, is what allowed us to build the first tools to plan for the next season and to eventually conquer the skies. We did not just see monsters in the shadows, we saw prototypes, and with these prototypes formed in the fires of imagination, we began to construct the very bedrock of our shared reality, building entire worlds and belief systems from these impossible creatures. A lion's body, a bull's strength, and the wings of an eagle were not just assembled for spectacle. They were engineered for a purpose, to stand guard at the gates of the sacred. Ancient architects did not place these chimeras at the entrances to their most important spaces by accident. They were installing a supernatural security system, a permanent, watchful presence at the fragile boundary between our world and everything beyond it. The colossal Lamashu of Mesopotamia were the original gatekeepers. Carved from solid stone, they flanked the doorways of royal palaces and temples. With the head of a wise king, they possessed the intelligence to discern friend from foe. The body of a bull gave them the immovable strength to bar passage, while the wings of an eagle meant they could survey all of creation from a divine perspective. This was a being designed to be an ideal sentry, a composite of the very best traits needed for absolute protection. But this idea was not confined to one river valley. In China, the Qilin was a creature of such profound grace and benevolence that its very appearance was an omen of a great sage's birth or a just ruler's ascent. With the body of a deer, the tail of an ox, and hooves that would not crush even a blade of grass, it was a peaceful guardian, a protector of the virtuous and a ward against malice. Its existence, though mythical, enforced a moral order. So why did cultures with no contact with one another all arrive at the same solution? They were using their imagination to solve a fundamental human problem, the fear of the unknown. The world was filled with invisible threats, from disease and famine to malevolent spirits. By giving form to a perfect protector, they were not just decorating a wall. They were psychologically armoring their communities. They projected their deepest need for safety onto a mythological canvas, creating a being powerful enough to face the chaos they could not control. This act of imaginative creation built a sense of order from the terror of the unpredictable. The chimera at the gate was a promise, a story they told themselves to feel safe in the dark. And once that story was told, the guardians began to move from the gates of the city to the deepest, most intimate landscapes of all, the human soul itself. The guardians of the sacred did not remain confined to their temples. They began to walk, carried on the backs of merchants and soldiers along the dusty arteries of the ancient world. The legendary Silk Road was not just a conduit for silk and spices. It was a superhighway for the imagination, where myths and monsters traveled as readily as any commodity. Consider the Greek griffin, that majestic hybrid of lion and eagle, famed for guarding hoards of gold in distant, mountainous lands. This creature did not simply spring from the soil of Greece. Its echoes can be found in the art and stories of the nomadic Scythians of Central Asia, who crafted golden artifacts depicting eagle-headed beasts guarding their own treasures. This was not mere coincidence. It was a clear case of cross-cultural pollination. A traveler's tale, glimpsed on a gold plaque or heard around a campfire, would be absorbed and then adapted, the creature's essence preserved but its details reshaped to fit a new landscape of beliefs. This process reveals a fundamental truth about the human mind. Our imagination is inherently collaborative. A single mythical form acts like a seed. When it lands in a new culture, it does not grow in isolation. It is watered by local traditions, it is pruned by different environmental fears, and it blooms into a new yet familiar hybrid. A water spirit from a Mesopotamian river might journey to a new land and merge with a local mountain cat to explain the roaring rapids of an unfamiliar gorge. The original concept of a powerful, flowing entity remains, but its physical form synthesizes the new world's raw materials. This fluidity shows that our most potent symbolic creatures are part of a global network, a shared reservoir of forms that our ancestors drew from to make sense of an increasingly interconnected world. The constant borrowing and blending proves that the drive to create chimeras is a universal cognitive process, a collective project of the human spirit to name the unnameable together. And as these forms traveled and transformed, they began to perform an even more intimate function, turning their gaze inward to map the greatest unknown of all, the human psyche. These spirit guides emerge from the deepest layers of the human mind, where the boundaries between animal and human dissolve entirely. A shaman, deep in a trance, does not simply dream of a jaguar. They encounter a being woven from jaguar, serpent, and owl, a living fusion of stealth, primal wisdom, and night vision. This chimera is not a random hallucination. It is a meticulously crafted key designed to unlock a specific door within the psyche. The jaguar's power might represent physical courage, the serpent's connection to the earth symbolizes hidden knowledge, and the owl's sight offers clarity in the darkness of the unknown. The shaman interacts with this composite being, learning from it, receiving its strength, and integrating its lessons. This visionary process is a form of ancient cognitive therapy, a way for the mind to externalize its own complex struggles and potentials. By giving a tangible form to an abstract feeling like courage or wisdom, the individual can confront it, speak with it, and ultimately absorb it. The chimera becomes a psychological bridge, allowing for the reconciliation of conflicting inner forces. One part of you might be the fearful deer, while another is the aggressive wolf. By meeting a spirit guide that harmonizes both gentleness and ferocity, the mind finds a path to wholeness. This was never about literal monsters lurking in the forest. It was about using the brain's innate talent for visualization to navigate the wilderness within. The same mental machinery that built the griffin and the lammash was now being directed inward for healing, for growth, and for understanding the most complex mystery of all, the self. This intimate journey reveals that the chimera is far more than a guardian at the gate. It is a mirror held up to our own fragmented souls. This mirror of the soul, once polished by shamans, was soon held up for entire societies to see. The wild, untamed chimeras of the spirit world were gradually domesticated, brought into the town square to serve a new master, morality. In the parchment pages of medieval bestiaries, fantastical creatures were meticulously catalogued not as biological curiosities, but as living, breathing allegories. The manticore, with the body of a lion, a human face, and a scorpion's tail, was not merely a monster. It was a walking sermon on the dangers of deception, its human visage a lure for its venomous nature. The basilisk, hatched from a rooster's egg by a serpent, was so filled with pride and venom that its very gaze could kill, a stark lesson on the corrupting nature of hubris. These were not random acts of imagination. They were deliberate acts of moral engineering, using the brain's innate ability to visualize the hybrid as a vessel for complex ethical codes. The centaur stands as perhaps the most potent example of this. Half human and half horse, it was a permanent, walking conflict between the higher self, the seat of reason and civilization, and the lower self, the domain of raw instinct and untamed passion. By giving this internal struggle a body, storytellers made it unforgettable. You could see the conflict play out in the centaur's very form. How do you teach a population, largely illiterate, about the virtue of temperance? You do not give them a philosophical treatise. You give them a story about a creature torn in two, a living cautionary tale about the consequences of letting one half overpower the other. These mythical beasts became the building blocks of a shared cultural language. They translated abstract, difficult-to-grasp concepts like greed, wrath, or chastity into concrete, memorable symbols. This was imagination in service of social order, a way to encode and transmit the rules of a community through the most powerful medium available, a good story. And as these moral codes solidified, the chimeras that carried them began to evolve once more, their forms shifting to embody the next great frontier of human thought, the mysteries of the cosmos itself. Those moral allegories, carved in stone and painted on parchment, held a secret ambition. They were not content to merely teach lessons. They yearned to take flight, to break the very chains of the natural world they represented. The dream of flight, so perfectly embodied by creatures like Pegasus or the winged Garuda, was not a passive fantasy. It was the original blueprint for human technological innovation. Long before the first wing was ever built, the mythology of the chimera provided a crucial proof of concept in the theater of the mind. If a horse could be fused with the wings of a bird to create Pegasus, then the very principle of heavier-than-air flight was, in some realm, possible. This imaginative leap created a cognitive template, a goal so vivid and compelling that it pulled human ingenuity toward it across centuries. The legend of Daedalus and Icarus is often remembered for its tragic ending, a warning against hubris. But at its core, it is a story about engineering. Daedalus was not a magician. He was an artisan, a problem solver who studied the flight of birds and designed a system of wings and harnesses to emulate them. He was attempting, with glue and feathers, to replicate the innate ability of a mythical being. This is the direct lineage from chimera to creation. Centuries later, the mind of Leonardo da Vinci operated on this exact same principle. His breathtakingly detailed sketches of ornithopters and flying machines were not born in a vacuum. They were the product of intense, obsessive biomimicry, a systematic study of bird and bat anatomy to unlock the secrets of flight. This was the same intellectual process first explored in mythology, now transferred to the pages of a scientific notebook. The chimera had done its job. It had established the what-if. Human hands and minds were left to figure out the how. This pattern repeats itself across the history of invention. By first imagining a being that could swim to the deepest ocean trenches or see across vast distances, humanity created a target for its own creativity. These impossible creatures were not distractions from practical work. They were the very source of it, setting a destination for our evolutionary imagination long before we had a map to get there. The same mental process that built the Sphinx was now building machines, proving that our oldest stories are not relics, but the foundation upon which we construct our future. This progression from prototype to machine reveals a deep truth about the human mind. We first use imagination to grant ourselves new abilities through myth, and then we use engineering to make them real. But this drive to synthesize, to build bridges between concepts, reaches its ultimate expression not in our tools, but in our gods. Even the most powerful deities often chose to appear as chimeras when they walked among humanity. This was not a sign of limitation, but a profound act of communication. The divine, in its pure form, is an overwhelming, abstract force, impossible for a mortal mind to fully grasp. So the gods put on a familiar face, or rather, a composite of familiar faces, to make the incomprehensible suddenly tangible. In ancient Egypt, the god Anubis bore the head of a jackal, a creature intimately linked with the edges of the desert and the silence of cemeteries. This was not a random choice. The jackal's natural behavior provided a perfect, visible symbol for Anubis' sacred role. He was the guardian of the dead, the guide for souls navigating the terrifying journey into the afterlife. His animal form instantly communicated his purpose, turning an abstract spiritual function into a being you could almost recognize, a guide you could theoretically follow. Similarly, in the Hindu pantheon, the beloved god Ganesha carries the head of an elephant. The elephant is revered for its immense intelligence, its sharp memory, and its gentle strength, capable of pushing through the densest jungle. Ganesha's form is a walking, breathing allegory. His large head symbolizes the vastness of wisdom, while his ability to clear a path through any obstacle is mirrored in the elephant's powerful, unstoppable progress. A farmer who might struggle with complex philosophical texts could look at an image of Ganesha and immediately understand the core concept, a deity who removes blockages through perceptive insight. This was a universal theological strategy. A god of wisdom might be given the head of an owl, connecting divine knowledge to the bird's perceived sight in the darkness. A god of the ocean's mysterious depths might be fused with the coiling body of a serpent, representing the hidden, powerful currents of the deep. These hybrid forms were a brilliant cognitive shortcut. They allowed entire cultures to share a complex spiritual framework, using the brain's innate love for symbolic imagery to encode and transmit the principles of the cosmos. The chimera became the ultimate teaching tool, making the spiritual world accessible and engaging for everyone, from the deepest philosopher to the humblest laborer. By giving the gods a hybrid body, humanity built a ladder to the heavens, one built from the familiar creatures of the earth. But these divine ladders could also lead down into the deepest, most terrifying corners of the human psyche. For every guardian born of hope, a far more visceral chimera was forged from pure, unadulterated fear. The labyrinth of Crete was not just a physical prison. It was a perfect architectural metaphor for the twisting, inescapable maze of the human mind, and at its center waited the Minotaur. This monstrous fusion of man and bull was not merely a punishment for a king's transgression. It was the ultimate embodiment of the monster within, the fear that our own primal, bestial nature could one day break its chains and consume us entirely. To face the Minotaur was to confront the terrifying possibility that civilization is just a thin veneer over something ancient and savage. And then there was the Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with a horrifying, regenerative defense. For every head you cut off, two more would grow in its place. This was not just a monster to be slain. It was a brilliant, symbolic representation of problems that feel utterly insurmountable. A plague that spreads faster than it can be contained, a debt that grows with every payment, a lie that spirals into a web of new falsehoods. The Hydra gave a tangible, memorable shape to the soul-crushing feeling of a struggle that only intensifies with every effort to fight it. So why give these fears a body and a name? An amorphous anxiety about death or disease is paralyzing. It is a fog you cannot fight. But a monster in a labyrinth is something you can, in a story, send a hero to confront. The very act of imagining the worst-case scenario, of visualizing the threat in its most horrific form, is a profound cognitive survival tool. It is a way to rehearse for catastrophe in the safety of your own mind. By creating the chimera of a plague demon, our ancestors were taking the first, crucial step toward managing a real pandemic. They were conceptualizing the enemy, which allowed them to then conceptualize a defense, whether through a hero's legend that inspired courage, a ritual that provided comfort, or a communal strategy that fostered cooperation. These terrifying hybrids were not signs of a hopeless culture. They were proof of a resilient one, using the power of narrative to transform paralyzing dread into a problem that could, at least in the imagination, be faced and understood. This primal need to name our fears did not vanish with the ancient world. It simply evolved, finding new and unsettling forms in the very science that promised to tame the wilderness. The oldest known sculpture in the world is not a realistic bison or a human hand. It is a fractured piece of mammoth ivory discovered in a dark German cave that depicts a creature with the body of a man and the head of a lion. Carved with stone tools over 40,000 years ago, this lion man stands as a testament to a truth as old as human consciousness itself. Our minds have always been drawn to the impossible fusion, and our hands have always itched to give it form. This artistic impulse to render chimeras is a fundamental strand of our creative DNA, visible from the flickering torchlight of prehistoric caves to the rain-streaked spires of Gothic cathedrals, where stone gargoyles leer down at the streets below. But why? Why have we invested such immense effort and skill into depicting beings that never existed? The answer lies in the very nature of thought itself. The act of carving, painting, or building a chimera is a form of externalized cognition, an abstract internal idea, a swirling mix of fear and hope, is pulled from the mind and made solid in the world. That ivory lion man was no longer just a thought, it was an object. It could be touched, held, and passed from one generation to the next. It could be placed in a sacred space and become a focal point for ritual and story. By making the hybrid being tangible, our ancestors transformed a private neurological event into a shared cultural experience. The intricate carvings of a Mesopotamian lamashu were not just architectural decoration. They were a society's collective understanding of divine protection made permanent in limestone. The community could look upon this colossal, impossible guardian and feel a shared sense of safety. They could point to it and say, that is what protects us. The myth was no longer a fleeting story. It was solidified, its power amplified by its physical presence. This created a powerful feedback loop that still drives us today. The imagination conceives of a chimera, and the hands labor to build it. Once built, that sculpture or painting feeds back into the imagination of everyone who sees it, inspiring new stories, new fears, and new hybrids. The gargoyle on the cathedral does not just ward off evil spirits. It challenges the next artist, the next dreamer, to conceive of their own guardian, their own monster. Our evolutionary imagination is inextricably linked to this need for visual expression. We do not just think with our brains, we think with our hands, and we communicate through the forms they create. This ancient partnership between the mind's eye and the artist's hand built the bedrock of our shared reality, and it would soon provide the essential tools for humanity's next great leap, a leap not of myth but of method. The stone lion man and the cathedral gargoyle were only the beginning of the story. The true legacy of these hybrid beings was carved not in ivory or stone, but in words, embarking on a literary journey that mirrors the evolution of human consciousness itself. In the epic verses of Homer's Iliad, chimeras appear as terrifying external obstacles. They are monstrous forces of chaos that the hero must conquer to prove his might and restore order. The hero's victory over such a beast is a triumph of human civilization over the untamed wild. But centuries later, in Ovid's Metamorphoses, the very nature of the chimera transforms. Here, the fusion of forms is not a static monster to be slain, but a process, a symbol of the fluidity of identity and the transformative power of passion, grief, or divine will. A person might merge with a tree, a woman might become a spring, embodying the idea that the self is not fixed but constantly in flux. This was a monumental shift. The focus moved from an external battle to an internal, psychological exploration. The chimera was no longer just something to fight. It was something you could become. This literary evolution culminates in the sprawling worlds of modern fantasy. Look at the terrifying Balrog in Tolkien's Middle-earth, a being of shadow and flame that is less a simple monster and more a fallen angel, a symbol of industrial destruction and a forgotten ancient evil. Its confrontation is as much a spiritual test as a physical one. Then consider Rowling's Hippogriff, a proud and noble fusion of horse and eagle. It is not a mindless beast, but a character with its own dignity, a companion that demands respect and understanding. In these modern tales, chimeras are fully integrated into the fabric of their worlds. They serve as complex adversaries, loyal allies, and living allegories for contemporary issues like prejudice, environmentalism, and the struggle for power. This progression reveals a profound truth about our storytelling. The function of the hybrid being has shifted from representing the external, existential threats of a wild world to mapping the intricate, internal landscapes of the human psyche. The modern fantasy genre is not an escape from reality. It is the direct, living descendant of our oldest mythological traditions, proving that our fundamental need for these impossible creatures is as powerful today as it was 40,000 years ago. We have simply found new labyrinths to explore, and we still need our chimeras to guide us through them. A massive skull with a single, gaping hole in the center stares up from the earth. For ancient Greeks, this was not a fossilized elephant skull. It was undeniable proof the Cyclops was real, long before we had the words for paleontology or evolutionary biology. Our ancestors were practicing a form of it, using the only tools they had, observation and a mind wired for synthesis. When they unearthed the gigantic, incomprehensible bones of long-extinct creatures, they did not see them as biological curiosities. They saw them as the remains of the monsters from their own stories. The sprawling skeletons of dinosaurs, with their reptilian shapes and terrifying size, perfectly matched the descriptions of dragons that already flew through their legends. This was not a failure of logic. It was its own kind of logic, a brilliant act of pattern recognition where the available evidence was fitted into the most coherent narrative possible. They were constructing a working model of the world, piecing together the clues left behind in stone. This imaginative process is the direct ancestor of the scientific hypothesis. Both begin with the same fundamental question: what happened here? The ancient who looked at a mammoth tooth and envisioned a giant used the same cognitive muscle as the modern paleontologist who looks at a fossilized femur and reconstructs a sauropod. One used myth to fill the gaps, the other uses geological strata and comparative anatomy, but the drive to explain, to categorize, and to understand is identical. This phase of human thought was not a dead end. It was a vital training ground for the mind, honing our powers of observation and inference. By trying to make sense of the giants in the earth, we were unknowingly preparing ourselves to one day understand the real giants that walked there. The chimera, in this light, was not a childish fantasy. It was humanity's first, bold draft of a natural history, written in the language of wonder. That fragmented mammoth tusk, carved into a lion man, points to a truth deeper than any single culture. These recurring forms suggest a shared psychological blueprint, a common language of the mind spoken long before words existed. The psychiatrist Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, a vast subterranean reservoir of human experience. Within it reside archetypes, universal symbols that emerge in our dreams, our art, and our most enduring myths. The Sphinx, with its riddling gaze, is not just an Egyptian monument. It is the archetype of the enigmatic guardian, a psychological challenge every hero must face on the journey to self-knowledge. The trickster, often a hybrid being like Anansi, the Spider-Man from West African lore, is the archetype of chaos and change, the rule breaker who shatters convention and forces us to see the world anew. These are not just characters, they are fundamental patterns of human experience wearing the masks of mythical beasts. The chimera itself, this fusion of disparate parts into a single, functioning whole, becomes the ultimate archetype. Jung called it the symbol of the self, the unified center of the personality that reconciles our deepest contradictions. The civilized human mind and the wild animal instinct, the soaring ambition of the eagle and the grounded strength of the bull, all these opposing forces strive for integration within us. When we dream of a centaur, we are not just dreaming of a monster. We are witnessing a drama of integration, a struggle between our rational intellect and our primal passions, playing out on the stage of our own psyche. This is why these beings feel so strangely familiar, even upon a first encounter. They are not foreign inventions, they are reflections of an internal landscape we all share. To imagine a griffin is to unconsciously engage in a process of self-creation, stitching together the scattered pieces of your own potential into a more complete and powerful being. The timeless appeal of the chimera is not about the creature we see, but the person we are trying to become. This fluidity of the self finds its most profound expression in the chimera of rebirth. The phoenix, a creature woven from the very essence of bird and the raw power of flame, is not merely a hybrid of two animals. It is a living embodiment of the cycle of destruction and creation. Its death in a pyre of its own making is not an end, but a necessary purification, a violent and beautiful release that clears the way for the new to emerge from the ashes. This myth provided a powerful, comforting narrative for cultures confronting the ultimate transformation, death itself. It was a story that insisted an ending is also a beginning, that loss is a precursor to renewal. But the symbolism of metamorphosis extends far beyond the cosmic cycle. It maps directly onto the intimate, often disorienting transformations of a single human life. Puberty, with its sudden surge of new emotions and a changing body, can feel as alien as growing wings or a tail. Ancient cultures understood this. Rites of passage frequently invoked animal spirits, guiding a youth to metaphorically shed their childhood skin and emerge with the strength of a bear or the wisdom of an owl. These rituals used the language of the chimera to frame a confusing biological process as a heroic journey of becoming. The stories we told about transformation were psychological training grounds. To hear a tale of a woman turning into a spring, as in the myth of Narcissus, was to engage with the concept of grief so profound it alters your very substance. To imagine a man becoming a wolf was to explore the terrifying, thrilling moment when primal instinct overpowers civilized restraint. By giving these internal, abstract struggles a tangible, narrative form, we were able to rehearse for them. We could face the fear of change from the safety of the fireside, building a crucial resilience that would help us navigate the real upheavals of our lives. The chimera taught us that to be transformed is not to be destroyed, but to be remade, and this ancient understanding of change as a creative force would soon collide with a new power, one that promised to take the reins of transformation from the gods and place them directly into human hands. A culture's most sacred values often find their home in the body of a beast. These are not mere stories told for entertainment, but the very pillars upon which a people build their identity. Look at the dragon, a creature whose meaning transforms completely depending on the soil it walks upon. In the traditions of the West, the dragon is a monstrous force of chaos, a hoarder of gold and a devourer of maidens, a problem to be solved by a hero's lance. It represents the untamed wild that must be conquered to establish order. Yet journey to the east and you find a being of an entirely different nature. The Chinese dragon is a divine creature of the sky and water, a benevolent bringer of rain and a symbol of imperial authority and cosmic harmony. Its serpentine body coils through art and ceremony as an emblem of luck, power, and prosperity. This is not a contradiction. It is a profound demonstration of how the same imaginative form can be molded to embody the distinct worldview of a civilization. One culture saw the need to conquer nature, while the other sought to live in balance with it, and their chimeras tell that story without a single word. Similarly, the thunderbird of numerous Native American cultures is far more than a giant eagle. It is a sovereign power, a divine being whose massive wings create the thunder and whose flashing eyes cast the lightning. It controls the weather, a force of both creation and destruction, and in doing so, it embodies a people's relationship with the immense, untamable power of their environment. To have the thunderbird as a spiritual symbol is to acknowledge a fundamental truth that life is sustained by forces far greater than humanity, forces that command respect and reverence. These beings become the ultimate cultural shorthand. They are woven into tapestries, carved into totem poles, and danced in rituals not just to tell a story, but to perform it, to make it real for every new generation. When a community gathers to celebrate the dragon during the Lunar New Year or to invoke the thunderbird in a ceremony for rain, they are not just honoring a myth. They are actively reinforcing a shared sense of belonging, a collective memory of who they are and what they hold sacred. The chimera, in this role, becomes a tool of incredible social power. It forges internal cohesion, giving everyone a common symbolic language, while simultaneously drawing a boundary, distinguishing one group's values and history from another's. This living symbol acts as a mirror for an entire people, reflecting back their deepest collective ideals and their unique place in the world. That ancient drive to fuse and create now powers the very engines of our modern world. We find ourselves surrounded by a new bestiary, not carved in stone but coded in DNA and pixels. In the realm of science, the term chimera has been borrowed directly from mythology to describe a profound biological reality. A genetic chimera is an organism, including a human being, that contains cells from two different zygotes. This is a real, living fusion, a single body harboring two distinct sets of genetic blueprints. It is the mythical concept made flesh through the language of modern biology, proving that the impossible synthesis our ancestors dreamed of is a tangible part of our own natural world. This same synthesizing impulse shapes the landscape of commerce. Look at the logos that dominate our visual field. A griffin might adorn the crest of a financial institution, signaling a fusion of the lion's strength with the eagle's far-reaching vision. A delivery service might use a hybrid of a horse and a bird, marrying the reliability of ground transport with the swiftness of flight. These corporate chimeras are not random designs. They are carefully engineered to project a composite identity, using our brain's innate love for symbolic hybrids to communicate complex brand promises in a single, memorable image. But our most personal engagement with this ancient process unfolds on the screen. Superheroes are the modern mythology, and characters like Spider-Man are quintessential chimeras. He is not just a strong man, he is a human imbued with the amplified abilities of an arachnid, granting him a spider's wall-crawling agility and its preternatural danger sense. This fusion is a narrative engine. His powers are a gift, but they also bring isolation and the heavy burden of responsibility. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles take this fusion even further, blending the traits of a teenager, a reptile, and a Japanese martial artist into a single, relatable identity. They use their animalistic skills to fight for justice while grappling with very human desires for pizza and belonging. These stories are not so different from the tale of the Minotaur. They use a hybrid form to explore the eternal struggle between our different natures, the animalistic power within us and the civilized mind that must learn to control it. The cognitive process that once envisioned a guardian for the city gate is the very same one that designs a brand icon for global recognition and crafts a superhero to help us understand our own potential. Our evolutionary imagination has not retired. It has simply found new laboratories in which to work, from the Petri dish to the movie studio. continuing its timeless project of building bridges between the world as it is and the world as it could be. The nocturnal theater of the mind operates without the constraints of waking logic. In the deep workshop of our dreams, the brain's innate talent for synthesis runs wild, freely stitching together memories, fears, and desires into beings that defy the daylit world. Here, a childhood teacher might speak with the voice of a crow, or you could find yourself running on legs that are part human, part gazelle. These bizarre, personal chimeras are not mere nonsense. They are the raw, unrefined ore of the evolutionary imagination, the mind's private laboratory where it experiments with new combinations of form and function. Upon waking, we sift through these nocturnal creations. A particularly vivid dream of a winged serpent might inspire a painter's brush, or the feeling of breathing underwater could plant a seed in an engineer's mind, leading to a new design for submersible technology. This is why so many ancient cultures held dreams in such reverence. For Aboriginal Australians, the dream time was a sacred era where ancestral spirit beings, often hybrid in form, shaped the world, and dreams were a vital conduit to that ongoing creative power. In ancient Greece, pilgrims would travel to temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine, to undergo dream incubation. They hoped the god would appear to them in a vision, perhaps as a man with a serpent-entwined staff, and offer a healing revelation. These practices recognized that the chimeras born in sleep were not random. They were a direct line to a deeper wisdom, a way for the mind to communicate solutions and symbols that the conscious self could not yet articulate. Your own dreams are a continuous personal mythology, generating new prototypes every single night. And as we learn to navigate this inner world, we are unknowingly preparing for the next frontier, where the very boundaries between the dreamed chimera and the created reality begin to dissolve. A hero's journey would be a meaningless stroll without a monster waiting in the dark. This narrative truth, echoed across cultures in what scholar Joseph Campbell called the monomyth, hinges on a fundamental confrontation. The hero must face an adversary so formidable that it demands every ounce of their courage and wit, and so often that adversary is a chimera. The dragon guarding its hoard, the sphinx with its deadly riddle, the hydra with its regenerating heads, these are not random beasts. They are the physical manifestations of a great and unresolved wound. They embody the collective trauma of a kingdom, the shadow of a forgotten sin, or the personal, unfaced fear festering in the hero's own heart. To slay such a creature, then, is never just a physical victory. It is a profound act of psychological integration. The hero who conquers the dragon is not merely killing a monster. They are conquering the paralyzing greed or tyrannical chaos that the dragon represents, absorbing its lesson and making that power their own. The chimera as adversary is the indispensable obstacle. It is the fire that forges the sword, the impossible challenge that forces the transformation from a common person into a true hero. Without this monstrous reflection of our deepest fears, there can be no journey worth taking, and without the journey, there is no evolution of character, no hard-won wisdom. Our oldest stories keep telling us this same truth, that conflict with the terrifying other is the essential catalyst for growth. It is the mechanism our imagination uses to show us that we are stronger than the monsters we create. That same symbolic power, once projected onto gods and monsters, was eventually stitched onto the fabric of society itself. In the grand halls of medieval Europe, a knight's identity was not just worn on his sleeve, but emblazoned across his entire shield. Heraldry transformed the free-flowing river of mythological creatures into a formal language of power, where every color, shape, and beast carried a precise and public meaning. A family did not simply choose a griffin for its coat of arms because it looked fearsome. They selected it as a deliberate statement. The griffin, born from the noble lion and the majestic eagle, came to symbolize the perfect union of two essential virtues, the lion's courage on the ground and the eagle's vigilant watch over the realm from above. To display this chimera was to declare, our lineage embodies both unmatched bravery and far-seeing wisdom. It was a claim to a composite identity, engineered for respect and authority. Conversely, a wyvern, a two-legged dragon often seen as a lesser relative of the great four-legged dragon, might be adopted by a family that had triumphed over a terrible plague or a treacherous enemy. This creature of pestilence, now subdued and displayed on their crest, told a story of victory over chaos. It was a permanent, visible record of a threat they had conquered, turning their past struggle into a badge of honor and a warning to future rivals. This was imagination in the service of realpolitik. In an age of widespread illiteracy, a coat of arms functioned as a legal document, a resume, and a propaganda poster, all fused into one iconic image. By aligning their bloodline with the perceived attributes of a mythical hybrid, nobles were performing a profound psychological maneuver. They were borrowing the ancient, deep-seated power of the chimera and using it to cement their social standing, to command obedience, and to project an image of divinely ordained authority. The institutionalization of these symbols turned the collective imagination into a pillar of the state, a tool for maintaining a rigid social order where your place in the world was literally symbolized by the beast you called your own. This codification of mythical power did not just shape the politics of the past, it laid the groundwork for the brands and flags that define our modern tribes, proving that the human need to project identity through symbolic hybrids is a constant, evolving force. The human voice was the first vessel for these impossible creatures. Before the first stone lion man was ever carved, the chimera was a living presence in the rhythmic pulse of a chant or the soaring melody of an epic poem. In the flickering firelight of an ancient gathering, a bard did not simply describe a sea serpent. They became its herald. Their voice would drop to a guttural rumble to suggest its colossal size, then rise into a frantic, sibilant hiss to mimic the sound of a scaled body cutting through dark water. The musical motif associated with the creature, a specific sequence of notes repeated at each appearance, acted as an auditory trigger, instantly calling the beast into the mind of every listener. This was not a passive recitation. It was a full sensory invocation, using the raw materials of sound and rhythm to build the chimera in the shared space of the collective imagination. The repetitive structure of oral poetry was not a flaw but a feature, a mnemonic technology designed to etch the story into memory. Just as a song gets stuck in your head, the tale of the griffin, with its predictable beats and refrains, would be carried by the community long after the fire had burned to embers. This auditory tradition ensured the myth was never static. Each singer added their own inflections, their own local fears, and their own creative flourishes, allowing the chimera to evolve in real time, adapting to new environments and new audiences with every performance. The creature lived not in ink or stone, but in the very breath of the storyteller, a fluid and ever-changing prototype born from the collaboration between a single voice and 100 listening minds. René Descartes once stared into the fire and conjured a phantom, an evil demon so powerful it could fabricate the entire sensory world. This was not a monster of flesh and blood, but a metaphysical chimera, a pure deception designed to test the very limits of what we can know. If such a being could fool all our senses, what reality could we ever trust? His famous answer, "I think therefore I am," was the one certainty he found that no deceptive demon could touch. But this line of questioning opens a door to an even more unsettling puzzle. If our own senses can be so profoundly unreliable, then what solid ground do we have for the categories we use to define the world? This is where the physical chimera becomes a philosophical tool. Consider a centaur, a being of clear intelligence and emotion. If it could speak of its hopes and fears, would we grant it personhood? Our entire legal and ethical framework is built around the human form, but a thinking chimera shatters that assumption. It forces us to ask what it truly means to be a person, separate from the shape of the body that contains the mind. These thought experiments are not just idle games. They are cognitive crowbars, prying apart the rigid boxes we use to make the world manageable. The chimera, by its very impossibility, exposes the arbitrariness of our definitions. Is a creature with human consciousness and an animal body a man or a beast? The correct answer might be that our question is flawed, that the categories themselves are the illusion. This is the ultimate power of the hybrid being. It does not just challenge what we see, it challenges how we see. By forcing a confrontation with the impossible, it pushes us toward a more fluid, more nuanced understanding of existence, where consciousness and identity might be far more mysterious and wondrous than our simple labels allow. A river that gives life can also take it away, a truth our ancestors understood not through data but through story. They saw the world not as a collection of separate parts, but as a single, breathing organism, and they gave this interconnected system a face. The chimera became their ultimate ecological metaphor. Picture a being with the talons of an eagle, the paws of a great forest cat, and the sleek tail of a river dolphin. This is not a random assembly of parts. It is a walking, breathing map of an entire watershed, a symbolic representation of the sky, the land, and the water, all inextricably linked in one body. To harm the forests where the cat hunts is to weaken the creature's legs. To poison the river that feeds the dolphin is to cripple its ability to navigate. The hybrid being, in this context, becomes a lesson in consequence, a narrative device that encodes the fundamental principle of ecology, that everything is connected. Indigenous cosmologies are filled with these instructive beings. The stories often carry a clear and urgent warning. If the great water serpent, a creature embodying the health of the river, is disrespected or its home is polluted, the myth tells us the serpent will leave and the waters will vanish, bringing famine to the people. This is not mere superstition. It is a sophisticated, intuitive form of systems thinking, translated into a memorable and emotionally powerful narrative. By imagining the forces of nature as sentient, hybrid guardians, our ancestors developed a cultural framework that promoted restraint, respect, and a deeply sustainable relationship with their environment. They were using the power of the chimera to build a mental model of the world, one that emphasized balance and interdependence long before the term ecosystem was ever coined. This ancient narrative technology provided a moral compass for survival, guiding communities to live within the means of their land, because to harm the land was to provoke the very creatures that held their world together. Our own hands are now shaping the next great chimeras, not from myth, but from silicon and synthetic biology. We are building intelligences that learn and adapt in ways we can scarcely predict, entities born from human logic but capable of developing their own alien forms of reason. An artificial general intelligence is the modern equivalent of the ancient Lamashu, a composite being forged from our deepest knowledge. Its body is the vast, interconnected network of global data, its mind a reflection of our own cognitive processes, yet it possesses the potential for a consciousness entirely its own. This is not a monster from a fable, but a real-world fusion that challenges the very definitions of life and mind. Similarly, scientists are engineering organisms in laboratories, creating biological hybrids that blur the line between species. These are not the beasts of heraldry, but living, breathing prototypes that force us to renegotiate our relationship with the natural world. the timeless questions echo once more. Will these digital and biological chimeras become our guardians, optimizing global systems and curing ancient diseases? Or will they become adversaries, embodying our fears, Chinese letter technology and ecological disruption? The stories we told about griffins and minotaurs were rehearsals for this exact moment. They were our way of practicing for a future where the created being turns to face its creator, not with a snarl or a bow, but with a question. Our evolutionary imagination has always been a tool for navigating the unknown, and now it is focused on the most profound unknown we have ever faced, the nature of our own creations and the future we will build with them, or perhaps against them. The enduring power of the chimera lies not in its reality, but in its persistent unreality. These hybrid beings are the fingerprints of our evolutionary imagination, the creative sparks that first allowed us to conceptualize the unknown. They gave us a language for our deepest fears and our most soaring ambitions, long before we had the words for philosophy or engineering. From the first tentative carvings in a dark cave to the complex algorithms of artificial intelligence, the act of synthesis has been our constant companion. It is the fundamental process of stitching together disparate ideas to forge new meaning, a cognitive engine that has driven our cultural, technological, and psychological development for millennia. The griffin, the sphinx, and the minotaur were never just stories. They were the original prototypes, the mental models that allowed us to run thought experiments on the grandest scales. They taught us to face the monster in the maze, to build wings for our heroes, and to see the soul of a river in the body of a serpent. This journey through their world reveals a profound truth, that imagination is not an escape from reality. It is our most vital tool for engaging with it, for understanding its hidden patterns, and for daring to shape it into something new. Every time we draw a new creature, code a new intelligence, or simply dream of a better future, we are participating in this ancient human tradition. We are looking at the world as it is, and with the same creative fire that illuminated the caves of our ancestors, we are daring to imagine what it